Welcome to the Communication Diva Podcast, episode 97. Today on the podcast, Jen interviews the Reverend Trisha Elliott. Trisha is an ordained minister with the United Church of Canada and an initiator of the Calendar Revs, a calendar project designed to challenge stereotypes of ministers in general and female ministers in particular. You know, personally, I've never been much for stereotypes, especially when it comes to calendars. You know the ones I'm talking about. Those calendars that offer up supposedly perfect physical specimens carefully chosen to adhere to socially constructed categories of what constitutes attractiveness. Those softly lit, airbrushed images designed to titillate the observer and sell more calendars in the process. Personally, I refuse to accept those impossible standards as normative. And here's a shout out to all the differently cute kittens and puppies who will never grace the pages of a calendar, but who are just as attractive as the ones who do.
Hey everyone, this is Jen Swanson and welcome to the Communication Diva Podcast. It is the beginning of December with all the craziness that goes on and not feeling anywhere near ready for the commercial side of Christmas anyway. Getting ready for all the other stuff, but there's lots and lots still to do, and I'm sure that as you're listening to this, you might be feeling the same way. But I want to bring you a conversation today that started out way back last spring when I was in Toronto at a conference, or not a conference, but a training session with the United Church, and sitting around a dinner table as these things happen, and talking to Reverend Trisha Elliott and about stereotyping and female clergy and all the things that go along with telling people what it is you do for a living. So I'm going to share that with you in a minute, and I hope you find it an interesting conversation, and I hope that you have that conversation with the people in your world. And also we're raising money for the Malala Fund, which is to educate girls around the world. So take a look at the website that's mentioned at the end. You can see all of the pictures of the calendar there, and even if you're not able to purchase a calendar, you can talk to people about what your stereotypes are and the things that you imagine or think about when you hear about female ministers. So that's what I'm going to bring you in a moment. Another thing I wanted to mention is that you might have noticed that the website has been rearranged a little bit, and I'm slowly working on shifting it over to a new format. And so if you have any thoughts or ideas, let me know. I've got a bunch of people helping out with that and working on that. Looking to do some more workshop leadership here in Vancouver, some speaking engagements, and also the promotion of the book. The cover of the book is there if you want to take a look at it. It's still in editing. I got lots and lots of work to do between Christmas baking and all the rest of it. But if you want to take a look at that, it is on the website at Communication Diva. A couple of other things. If you're interested in books, I also am hosting a podcast for Influence Publishing. You can find it on iTunes. It's called The Authors of Influence Radio. And this is where I interview people who have written books that are published about the story behind the story that they've written about. So go over to Authors of Influence Radio on iTunes and check that out. And there are lots of different topics that are very interesting, I think. So those are all the things I have to say at the beginning, and I'll turn you over now to my interview with Trisha Elliott. All right, so here I am with the Reverend Trisha Elliott, who is talking to me from Ontario, which is quite a ways away, several hours time difference here. And I'd like to welcome you to the Communication Diva, Trisha.
Thanks, Jennifer. It's good to be here.
And I am excited about this project because of a few things. One of them is that I get to be part of it,
Ah,
but the other one is that I think it's a great question, and it's also a really good idea to raise money for the Malala Fund. So before we get into all of that, I want to just ask if you can tell the listeners the story.
sure. Well, I'm a United Church minister, and I was leaving a congregation in Ottawa to begin another job in another congregation. And I was asked to sit for a photo shoot so that I could get my headshot taken for the church's Wall of Fame. And during the photo shoot, the photographer talked to me about not tilting my head sideways too much because I looked, quote, like too much like Jennifer Aniston, and I had to look like a real minister. And we had several conversations about what I should be wearing, whether or not I should wear a gown, and whether or not I should wear a collar. And we settled on my wearing a cross because I said that my congregation might not recognize me if I wore a collar. Like my Wall of Fame photo would be completely different from how they knew me. And then I shared that experience with some colleagues on Facebook, and I sort of jokingly asked, what does a minister look like anyway? And I think the response, we had over 100 responses, and women were weighing in on how they were asked to look less sexual in photographs, and then beyond that, we're told what pastimes were appropriate for them to engage in, and what they should and shouldn't do with their free time, who they should and shouldn't marry, and we had a cheeky idea to come up with a calendar that portrayed us doing some of the things that we were told that we shouldn't be doing. And it started out just sort of as a fun venture, but there are some serious issues that underlie it, and it's really taken off in the last week or so.
So who was saying that you should and shouldn't do these things? Who were those people?
Members of the community and members of the congregation.
Oh, and these were women from across the country, and were they just Canadian women?
Yes, they were Canadian women and United Church clergy who were weighing in.
And so their congregations and the people in their communities were dictating to them how they should dress and what things they should or shouldn't do and what relationships they should have.
Yes, exactly.
Wow, that's
Yes.
so there's kind of a stereotype out there then.
There's certainly some stereotypes out
And
there.
can you describe that stereotype in any way?
Well, for many of us, the stereotypical minister is the minister that we see on TV as portrayed on TV as being older, male, and white. And I mean, in the United Church of Canada right now, more than half of clergy are women, but there still is that stereotype that ministers are very traditional, very serious, and often male.
Right, and it's really hard to find an example of something other than that in the media, isn't it?
Right, it is hard. Yeah.
You have the Irish drunk priest or something.
Yes.
I mean, that just must drive people who happen to be Irish and priests crazy.
Exactly.
And they're bumbling fools, or they're
Right.
evil.
They're evil. Yes, they're very, very serious. Yes.
And older. Isn't that interesting? And I mean, yeah, the colleagues that we have are just so far from that in so many
Yes.
ways.
Well, it affects our male colleagues as well because many of them don't fit those stereotypes either. And so I think it's not just a women's issue. I think that gender issues affect all of us. So if women are perceived as in a certain way, then men are as well. So it's not a women versus man issue. It's really deeper issues around gender that affect all of us, regardless of our genders.
And why do you think people stereotype?
That's a good question. Well, I think some of it, quite honestly, comes from our experience. So the last two congregations, for example, that I have served have only ever been served by older white men, because historically that's who's been in leadership. So I think we come by some of the stereotypes very honestly.
And so did you have particular things you rubbed up against being not elderly and not a male?
Oh, well, certainly all the time when people see me in a ministry role, whether that's in the community, for example, leading a funeral or a wedding, I'll get comments like, I never would have thought that somebody so young could be a minister, and how young are you anyway? Or I've never, and my favorite is, I've never met a woman minister before. Like, the male minister is normative.
Yeah.
And then that women ministers need to be in some way qualified by the language that we use. So I get that constantly. Also, a lot of concern about how I dress. So I was at one time married to a minister who wore the same suit every single day to work. Maybe mixed up the shirts, but pretty much the same suit. Never had a single comment about what he was wearing. But as a woman in ministry, if I wore the same suit 3 weeks in a row, then for sure on the way out the door, somebody would mention it. Right.
Huh. That's interesting, because I get that as well at weddings and funerals. A woman minister. It just seems to be a thing, and in the United Church of Canada denomination, it's really not a thing anymore. No. And so I'm always surprised by that there is so much surprise out there still.
Well, it's interesting because the United Church of Canada is a very progressive denomination. We've been ordaining women since 1936. Lydia Grucci was the first ordained woman in the United Church. So we have been ordaining women for a long time. And right now we're rightly concerned with other issues around the environment and Aboriginal rights. So that I think we sort of think, well, we have the sexuality, gender issue covered, and we've been doing it for so long that we're all good now. But the reality is that while there are still more women than men serving in ministry in the United Church, the largest churches are headed by men. The largest salaries going to men. So I think that there is still work to do.
Right. And it's often, when you're at a wedding or a funeral, you're not exclusively dealing with people who understand the United Church either.
Exactly. And I remember one person saying to me, "I don't know what to call you. Are you a ministress?"
You're kidding.
A ministress? Yes. I've had people call me who are obviously Catholic call me mother on the way out the door because they're not sure, right?
Right.
Priest our father, and what do you call a woman minister?
Right.
Mother?
Right.
Right. So there has been some confusion.
I was asked a while ago, and I haven't pursued it because I have too many things in the hopper, but I was asked a while ago if I would consider, and he wasn't sure how to say it, the padre for the fire department.
Right.
And I went home and I thought, so what would you be called? Like a madre? like what would people? I thought that is just so unusual. Like, just call me Jen, right?
Yeah. Well, when you talk about stereotypes, it was interesting when I initially had conversation on Facebook and all the women were weighing in, that I joked and I said, maybe I should take a picture for the Church Wall of Fame with high heels and fishnets, kind of joking.
Yeah.
And then one of the women said, but I wear that in my work, Trish, because she does street ministry.
Right.
And I realized that I too have my own stereotypes of what a minister ought to look like.
Right.
So even as I was sort of railing against the stereotypes, I had bought into some of them. And it gave me pause to think, okay, well, which ones do I adopt and why?
Yeah. It's a good question. Mm-hmm. Because I think we're all prone to stereotyping, different people, different roles.
Yeah.
And to catch ourselves on doing that and catch ourselves and then ask that deeper question as to why we do that is a really good thing, which I think is the point, one of the points of this calendar.
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, the deeper question is really how we mediate holiness. Like, I think that most of us would agree that saying, I'm going to follow you, God, if your spirit is mediated to me through an elderly white man is ludicrous.
Right.
Like, we know that that's less than faithful, because God's Spirit can be seen through men, through women, through rocks and plants and trees. So we know that, but still those stereotypes settle in. And so it's, we need to discern how it is that we are willing to meet, where it is that, and who it is that we're willing to meet God in and through, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a deeper question about how we experience the holy and how open we are to experiencing the holy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a good thing. So how do you respond when someone seems surprised?
It used to be bothersome. Now I have learned.
I'm curious because I'm the newbie here. I'm asking.
Oh, you mean when somebody says to me, I didn't know a woman could be a minister?
Yeah.
Well, often I'll turn that back and I'll say, well, what makes you think that a woman can't be a minister? Or what in your experience has led you to believe that women can't be in ministry? And often that opens doors to all kinds of deeper conversation, right, about one's past and how the stereotypes have settled in, often at an early age. Mm-hmm.
And for other traditions, that is a reality. A woman can't be a minister.
It is, yes.
Yeah, which I find fundamentally sad, but I mean, that's another whole conversation.
Yeah.
But it's, but so some people do grow up that way, thinking that it has to be a man.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's not that person being in any way rude or intending to be rude. So intention has a lot to do with it, right?
Right.
It's the person registering surprise. Right. And so when we understand where the comment is coming from, it's easier to respond in a way that's gracious.
Yeah. In one of the courses that I teach, we were using a piece out of a textbook that was about common Canadian stereotypes. And when you read them out loud, they sounded ridiculous.
Yes.
All Italians are mafia. Like it was just, all Asians are smart. Like it just went on. And I read them out loud with humor. And then we had a whole conversation about why. And it was very interesting because most of my class is young women, but a very diverse class culturally, lots of different ethnic backgrounds. And it was very interesting to have that conversation. And I was told a story once about a woman who was working in Montreal, and she happened to be Jewish. And there was a coworker of hers, a young guy, and I guess they were downsized, and she was losing her job, and she was devastated. And the young guy looked at her and said, "Well, you don't need the money, right?" And she looked at him, she says, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, you're Jewish, you're rich." Ugh. And it was a complete, it wasn't rude. It was ignorance around the fact that he was buying into a stereotype. And she did not know how to respond to that. But she liked this guy and she knew he wasn't being hurtful. But it was a really good example of, some assumptions that people make around, cultures and roles, and it's quite something.
Well, I think some of those assumptions around women in ministry come from some ideas that we've been steeped in, or Christianity has been steeped in historically. So, historically we've been preoccupied with repressing sexuality. So in the early church, for example, sexual organs were thought to be filthy and degrading, and you can read stories, really awful stories about church leaders castrating themselves and priests who invented all kinds of contraptions to prevent them from getting erections. And then at the same time, women historically have been identified with sexuality and the body. So you have on one hand sexuality being deemed bad, and women who can never really escape from their sexuality because they menstruate and because they bear children. And so it's not a big leap between thinking that sexuality is bad, equating women with sexuality, and then saying that women cannot be spiritual leaders because they're too sexual. And I think today women continue to be highly sexualized, identified with their bodies. So, women are double whammied. First, they're identified with sexuality, and then sexuality is deemed sinful. And I think we're not really conscious of how the separation between spirituality and sexuality has an impact on our ability to accept the leadership of women in religious institutions. So I think we need to be doing a lot more work in terms of developing a theology of spiritually healthy sex. We've talked a lot about gender and we've talked about sexuality, but in terms of sex itself, I think we have some work to do in developing a theology of spirituality and sexuality that go hand in hand. Because as long as women are deemed sexual and sexuality and spiritually are separated in our minds, then women will have a hard time being taken seriously as leaders in the church.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it's a taboo subject in so many spheres.
Right.
And it is.
I think too, as men become increasingly sexualized, that will then be a problem as well for men. So in the calendar there's an image of Reverend Molly Bell from Orleans United in which she's wearing her high heels.
That's right.
And that's very authentic to Molly, because she enjoys wearing her very colorful high heels on Sunday morning. And for some, there's a discomfort with that because it blends, in a sense, spirituality and sexuality. But I think that's her point, that those things may not be divorced.
Right. And I remember being a student and going to some conference, and a whole bunch of female ministers were going out shopping. Right. And I remember this whole conversation about buying red shoes.
Yes.
And they were red, super sexy high heel shoes.
Yes.
And it was almost like we were doing something wrong by buying really, really nice shoes and then threatening to wear them with our robes, right?
Well, that's it. Well, and that's part of the experience that people shared on Facebook, that when women became pregnant, and of course, if you're pregnant, then what leads to pregnancy, right?
Right.
The attitude to them changed, and it was more difficult for them to offer leadership in the church because the fact that they were sexual beings was very evident. You couldn't keep that division in their minds, right? Between sexuality and spirituality. So that's why I'm saying that we need to develop a theology of sexuality and spirituality that doesn't see them as polar opposites.
Right, because the Bible is actually full of imagery.
Sure is.
And it is quite a natural part of life. So
long live the Song of Songs.
Absolutely. And so it is kind of, when you think about it, it really is quite amazing that so much repression and so much separation has gone on over centuries.
Yeah.
Centuries. So this is a big task.
Yes, it is a big task.
So what is the goal of the calendar?
Well, we had a few goals. One of them was just to have more conversations like the one that we're having, and to have them very publicly, to have conversations about gender and sexuality, and how gender and sexuality is discussed both in the church and beyond the church's walls. So really, one of them was just to spark some of these conversations. Another goal was to challenge the stereotypes of what a minister should look like and what activities they should engage in, to spark a conversation about holiness and how holiness is packaged, and how receptive we are to encountering the Spirit of God through all things in this world. And also there was a goal to raise money for the Malala Fund, which is an international organization that advocates for girls' education.
Right, so it's got a number of different goals. And how far has the reach been thus far?
Well, it's been pretty incredible, because we've started talking about the Calendar Project on social media about a week or so ago. We've already sold 117 calendars online, and the women have committed to selling 450 calendars hand to hand. So, we've sold over, for sure, about 600 calendars. And on top of that, we're starting to get some media attention coast to coast in Canada. And again, that attention will serve to spark conversations like the one we're having today.
Right, and there have been some sold in the U.S. as well, and Australia.
Yes, there have been. Yes, that's been delightful to see. So I am really thankful for our friends in the United States who are supporting the project by purchasing the calendar.
Right, and this is not a calendar of, scantily clad people.
No, no, it's not. It's a calendar that shows many facets of women's clergy's lives. So there are photos in the calendar where women clergy are engaged in very serious things like mediating disputes during protests, to belly dancing in their spare time. And it shows lesbian women who are in a marriage relationship, lesbian women ministers, as well as there's a lovely shot of a woman minister breastfeeding. And again, all of the images together are meant to challenge the stereotypes. Right. And some of them aren't too serious.
Right. Right, because there's a lot of humor too. That's the other thing, we're not always super serious people.
Yes, and there is a month for clergy appreciation. I thought there was a clergy appreciation day, but it's actually a full month, and that's on the calendar too. So.
Yay!
Yeah,
because often it's hard stuff. When people say, hey, what do you do? I'll often say, oh, I'm a podcaster, or I'm an author, or I'm a teacher. But it takes me a bit to say I'm a minister.
Yes.
And it's sad that, because I'm very, very happy to be serving. But it's almost, there's caution there around answering it depending on what context I'm in.
Well, exactly. And then the part of the challenge is that when you say you're a minister, some people become very self-conscious.
Right.
All of a sudden, like, I'm sorry, and then start apologizing. I'm sorry, I haven't been to church in 3 months, and I'm sorry, I swore, and I shouldn't swear around you.
Yeah.
and so yes, when you sort of out yourself as a minister, it opens you up to receiving people's shame and embarrassment in a way that you maybe don't want to.
Well, and isn't that interesting, because there's guilt or something there?
Yes.
And I didn't ask. I didn't ask you what your spiritual life was like, and I really don't care.
Yes,
not that I don't care, but I don't in a social context or whatever, I'm not looking for you to confess to me that you haven't been to church for, that's your business and God's business. But it's fascinating to me. And sometimes my husband, who's also a minister, will look at each other when somebody says, oh, what do you two do? We'll look at each other with this sort of little half grin and say, oh, are we going to go there?
Exactly. Well, then it becomes a choice whether at a party you want to go there, because the other thing is that you don't want all of a sudden people's real experience to become fake for them.
Yeah.
You don't want them to feel that they have to put on a facade
Yeah.
for you, nor do you want to feel that you have to do that either, because you need to meet some expectation that they have around what a spiritual leader is.
Right. Yeah, because, if you have a glass of wine in your hand, then that becomes questioned, or, you want to go dancing at the party or whatever.
Yes.
Or you've got your high heels on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's an interesting place to be. And I'm, has there been any negativity so far?
With the Calendar Project?
Yeah.
I have received no negativity whatsoever yet. No, in fact, our colleagues have been very encouraging. In fact, to date, more of our male colleagues have purchased calendars than our female colleagues. I think that they're trying to be very supportive.
Yeah, and I have received a tweet that I think I shared with the group of a male colleague of ours somewhere in the middle of the country who said, I have awesome colleagues.
Yes.
And I thought, oh, that's great. There's support out there, and it's lovely.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Lovely. Well, this is great. And so if people want to look online, where can they go to see the both pictures of the calendar and maybe order one or two for Christmas?
Yes. So you can go to our website to read more about how the project was conceived and to purchase a calendar at www.calendarrevs, all one word.com. So www.calendarrevs.com.
Perfect. And I will have all of that and some more information as well on the website over at communicationdiva.com and the links to that as well. Well,
And even if people decide not to purchase a calendar, we would ask that they share the link to the website in their social media groups, just so that we can start to raise the questions that we're asking and raise awareness. And so if people could play a part in sharing some of the content, that would be helpful.
that would be lovely. And you're going to be on a national radio broadcast in the near future?
I am. On January 11th, I'll be on Tapestry, CBC's Tapestry program. They're going to do a feature on the Calendar Revs.
Right, and I know that there have been local newspapers all across the country asking for articles and doing features on the various ministry personnel who are in the calendar. How many are in the calendar?
I haven't counted, but I think over 20.
Right.
21 or something like that.
Because some of the pages have more than one picture.
Well, we had so many people come forward wanted to be in the calendar, more people than months. So, and I didn't want to exclude anyone that wanted to participate. So, we have group shots on some of the pages.
That's right. Oh, it's lovely. Well, this has been great, and it's been a lot of fun, and I appreciate being part of this project as well. So, thank you, Trisha.
Well, thank you, Jennifer.
That's great, and thanks for coming on to the Communication Diva. I'm sure we'll have some feedback here.
Awesome.
So there's the interview, and if you want to come over to Communication Diva, you can see the picture of the front of the calendar, and there are links to the website there, calendarrevs.com. And also, I would like to encourage you to sign up for my email list, because I can keep you, I don't send out emails very often at all, but I can let you know about upcoming events and also about things like when the book is coming out and when you can get your first copy of it. So come on over and sign up for that at communicationdiva.com. Also, if you're interested in podcasting yourself, I've got some resources in the resource page for Libsyn, for Stitcher Radio, which is where you can also listen to this podcast and many, many, many other podcasts. And a friend of mine is teaching a course called Podcasting A to Z. So if you're interested in that, there is a discount code with Communication Diva for that program, and he runs it several times a year. So the outline and description of what that is on the resources page. All right, well, I hope you are busy getting ready, baking, enjoying a little bit of the season. And until we talk next time, take good care. This is Jen Swanson. Thanks for listening.